Two countries separated by more than 1,000 kilometers, with no shared border and no direct colonial conflict, have become two of the most determined rivals in the modern world. Iran and Israel now stand on opposite sides of a conflict that threatens to reshape the Middle East. What makes this rivalry remarkable is that the two countries were not always enemies. For decades, they quietly cooperated through intelligence sharing, trade, and strategic partnerships. Over time, however, that relationship transformed into a deep geopolitical rivalry fueled by ideology, regional power struggles, and decades of mistrust. For many years, the conflict remained mostly hidden. Rather than fighting each other directly, Iran and Israel engaged in a shadow war involving cyber attacks, covert sabotage, assassinations, and proxy militias operating across the Middle East. Cyber attacks, covert sabotage, assassinations, and proxy militias operating across the Middle East. Countries like Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Gaza, and Yemen became battlegrounds where each side attempted to weaken the other indirectly. Analysts long warned that if this shadow conflict ever turned into open confrontation, it could destabilize the entire region. To understand how this rivalry formed, the story goes back to the early 20th century and the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. When the empire fell after World War I, Britain and France divided much of the Middle East into new territories, often drawing borders without regard for the people living there. One of these territories was Mandatory Palestine, which soon became the center of growing tensions. At the same time, a movement known as Zionism was gaining momentum among Jewish communities facing persecution in Europe. Zionists believed that Jewish people needed a homeland where they could govern themselves and live safely, and many saw Palestine as that homeland. In 1917, Britain issued the Balfour Declaration supporting a Jewish national home there, even though it had also promised independence to Arab leaders in the same region. These contradictory promises helped create rising tensions between Jewish immigrants and Arab Palestinians. After the Holocaust, global support for a Jewish homeland increased dramatically. In 1947, the United Nations proposed dividing Palestine into two states, one Jewish and one Arab. Jewish leaders accepted the plan, but Arab leaders rejected it. In 1948, Israel declared independence, and neighboring Arab nations invaded. Israel survived the war and even expanded its territory. Israelis saw this as their war of independence, while Palestinians remembered it as the Nakba, a catastrophe that displaced more than 700,000 people. During these early decades, Iran was not directly involved in the conflict. Under Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, Iran maintained relatively normal relations with Israel and even cooperated with it in intelligence and trade. This relationship began to change after political turmoil inside Iran. In 1951, Iranian Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh nationalized the country's oil industry, which had been dominated by British interests. In response, the United States and Britain supported a covert operation in 1953 that removed Mossadegh from power and restored the Shah's authority. Although Western governments saw this as a strategic success, many Iranians viewed it as foreign interference in their democracy. So, resentment toward the Shah grew over the following decades as his government became, more authoritarian. In 1979, a revolution actually forced him to flee the country. Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini then returned from exile and established the Islamic Republic of Iran. The new government strongly opposed Western influence and, rejected Israel's legitimacy. Diplomatic ties with Israel ended immediately, transforming the two countries from quiet partners into ideological enemies. Rather than confronting Israel directly, Iran began supporting militant groups across the region that opposed Israel. The most prominent of these was Hezbollah in Lebanon, founded in 1982 with Iranian backing. Over time, Iran also supported other groups, including Hamas in Gaza and allied militias across Iraq and Syria. This network allowed Iran to pressure Israel without engaging in direct war. Another major source of tension emerged when Iran began developing nuclear technology in the 1990s. Iran insisted the program was for civilian energy, but Israel and many Western governments feared it could lead to nuclear weapons. Israel responded with covert operations aimed at slowing Iran's nuclear progress, including cyber attacks and the assassination of nuclear scientists. By the early 21st century, the rivalry had evolved into a complex shadow war fought across the Middle East. Israeli airstrikes targeted Iranian positions and weapons shipments in Syria, while Iran continued strengthening its regional allies. For many years, this conflict remained indirect and largely hidden from public view. In recent years, however, tensions have escalated dramatically. Proxy attacks, missile strikes, and covert operations have intensified, pushing both countries closer to direct confrontation. Each attack triggers retaliation, raising the stakes further and increasing the risk of a wider regional war. The conflict between Iran and Israel did not begin with a single event. It developed over more than a century through shifting alliances, revolutions, wars, and ideological divisions. From the collapse of the Ottoman Empire to the creation of Israel and the Iranian Revolution, each stage of history moved these two nations closer to the rivalry that now defines much of Middle Eastern geopolitics. Today, the world is watching as the consequences of that long history unfold. Understanding that history is essential to understanding what may happen next.